this is a diagram that Dorothy Rowe, who is an energy healer, uses to sort of framework the conceptualization of her work. I'll just kind of share, and then I'd love to get your reflections
Yeah.
and kind of go back and forth like that.
Hmm.
Okay, so I guess the first part is there's almost like a story that sort of contextualizes it. So the story is kind of like in the beginning was the ocean of being, just pure consciousness, aware of itself. And then within that pure consciousness, aware of itself, that awareness, that aliveliness of awareness stirred something within itself, like a subtle vibration. And that subtle vibration gave it something to be aware of and gave it the process of like a three-part experience, which is the observer, the observed, which would be that subtle vibration, and then the process of observing. So that's kind of like the first step of creation: observer, that which is observed, and the process of observation. And that expresses out as very, very subtle expressions of consciousness, which on the diagram is labeled as the causal body, sometimes called the celestial body. So it's that aspect of our experience that is very close to source. And then on the very close to ocean of being end of things is just like very abstract spaces, just spaces. And those spaces are like laws of nature in a way, just very abstract, like laws of nature that form the very basis of all expression. Um, so we call them spaces, but they're like spaces in consciousness, very subtle. And as it kind of expresses outward through the causal body at the furthest layer of the causal body towards the astral body is kind of like the what we might call the beings of light, those expressions of light that start to take on a shape and qualities, more so like almost like having, we can see them as having like almost like personalities, and also where you would say things like the ascended masters reside, uh, enlightened beings from all ages who now reside with the light, basically. Um, so she has their laws of nature. So there's different ways of looking at it. Like you could look at it as personalities, like angels and things like that. But on a less personal level, you could call it laws of nature because they underlie the expression of the natural world. Yeah. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that much so far.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because it parallels, and of course it would. But a lot of my training through the Transcendental Meditation
Yeah.
organization and
Yeah.
knowledge from the Vedas, and of
Yeah.
course the observer, the observed, and process of observation. And
Hmm.
actually, so I studied under Dr. Tony Nader,
Mm.
who's a neuroscientist um, that took over the TM organization after Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And
Okay.
he wrote a book called Consciousness is All There Is.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's trying to really bridge the gap, right, between that like ancient knowledge and modern science,
Yeah.
and is using that understanding as to describe like one unit of consciousness, essentially. So saying everything is consciousness, and you can break it down to one single unit, and that unit would be that, observer, process of observation and observed. And you can take
Mm.
any like example and break it down into that. So, people are like, well, how is a rock conscious? Well, because it is experiencing. So, you know, you can fit it into those three categories. I like to think of it actually as like noun, verb, noun.
Mm,
You can really just fill in the blanks that way. So, like rock falling to the ground, that is one unit of consciousness. That rock is like experiencing that with
mm,
another, like object. It's,
mm.
that is one unit of consciousness. So that's what came up for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, is the rock experiencing that, or is consciousness experiencing that?
Right. I would say, like, from the point of view of the rock, right?
Mm,
The rock is not thinking about its experience. It's not like reflecting about its experience, right? So
mm,
there are more and more complex configurations of consciousness, like the human being, right? Which, is like many points really, and like
mm.
the ability to reflect about the experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense that this is very reflective of the TM because Dorothy came through the whole TM movement and mostly built this system through conversations with other TMers and through her own experience. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we have the causal body, and it merges down into an even as we go through these layers, the expression becomes more complex. It becomes more dense. The vibration becomes more dense. You could say the vibration maybe slows down is a way of saying it in a way, becomes more solidified. So from the causal body to the astral body, we come to a more uh, solidified kind of expression of consciousness where consciousness is experiencing itself, you could say further from its source, like further out expressed from its source. And in a way, it's an evolution. Like first consciousness just did little tiny forays into like light expressions and then back to consciousness and then light expressions and back to consciousness. But as that developed, it complexified and was able to express even further out into the astral body. And the astral is where subtle spaces, like the causal body is like subtle vibrational spaces, kind of like condensed down into threads of consciousness. So it becomes more structured. And uh, so that transition is kind of from like subtle vibrational spaces into subtle threads of kind of flow of consciousness flowing along pathways. And then all those threads connect with each other in certain places, and that creates nodes of consciousness, threads and nodes. And that's what's sometimes called the web of life or Indra's net, where everything is interconnected. Uh, and and yeah, everything's interconnected and interwoven. And um, yeah, on both of these levels, I would just say they're both considered, they're like collective levels. So there's no individuality on these layers of reality. Everything is one thing, and everything in its expression is very clearly just one thing. Like you can't experience the astral body without oneness. So it's not a personal experience. Um, and the other point of it is that on both these levels, there is still that play of like light and dark, you could say, like positively and negatively oriented experiencing. So as you move through the astral body, there is what sometimes gets called the lower astral, which is largely populated with like negative, negatively oriented experiences, but still is connected into that whole entire web network. Yeah.
Mhm. I'm curious to hear about the aura section.
Yeah. Well, I haven't learned too much about it, but I have like my own intuition about it, that it's kind of, well, it's the bridge from the collective to the personal. It's like the bridge from collective oneness experiences into a me and my experience.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes it gets called like the light body, the body of light. Um, I think you could say it contains all of the potentialities of the individualized experience,
Mhm.
but on a subtle level that's more like in its potentiality than in its manifestation. Um, and of course, it is where the human physiology links into, Indra's net. Like it's that bridge. So it's where we become subtly aware of our connection with oneness and wholeness and the astral and causal experiences. Um, yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, that resonates a lot.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And then as we come down into the emotional body, that's the first layer that's like clearly personalized. So it's kind of like me and my emotions. Um, I have certain emotions, you have other different emotions. And uh, yeah. And I mean, the aura kind of bridges down into the emotional body. So the emotions, I guess, in this model are considered kind of the most subtle layer of personalized experiencing. And on the most subtle edge, it merges up into the aura and into that collective.
And
Yeah.
that makes sense, right? I mean, you can feel like a strong emotion, from another, you can, right, sense that
Yeah.
in the body.
And both the emotional body and the aura are quite related to like the whole chakra system and those energy centers within the body. Like that's where the emotions kind of flow through and resonate within. And different emotions might be associated with different, chakra areas, or the interplay between two energy centers in the body creates like a third sort of emotional experience. Um,
Do
yeah.
you ever do you ever get the sense that emotions are like entities themselves, like wanting to move through to like
Mm.
be expressed and felt?
Mm. Yeah, I think that that would be entirely possible. In a sense, that's probably just two different sort of layers of the same thing. Like on the emotional level, it feels like a stuck emotion, but on the astral level, it could be expressing as an actual, a unit of intelligence that could be perceived as a being
Mm-hmm.
that has its own experience. And
It honestly that does like resonate with me. And I've actually like sat in meditations and like with the intent to get to understand a certain like emotion, like the
yeah,
purpose of it for
mm,
humanity. And I've like gone into like crazy like, journeying in my meditations with
yeah,
these almost as like beings, as like they'll start to show up, in a vision, like as an actual like character almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
as a way to kind of relate to it and interpret it and communicate with it.
Right. Just to like get a sense of it or something. Like it's just showing, oh, you want to see what I am? Like it will show you a little like representation of itself.
Mm.
Yeah.
How do you find you're kind of able to relate to it on that level? Like, is there any sort of keys to unpacking it to that degree?
Well, like I'm a little weirdo. I've had a crazy life. So,
Mm,
you know, one example would be like madness.
at first was the use of the term body, because we don't think of like the heavenly realms really as being part of our body.
Uh-huh.
But I think from this perspective, it's like everything is part of myself, and is an expression of consciousness in its own subjectivity. So I mean, I can kind of understand the earth as my body because the physical bodies seem to come from the earth. But as you kind of open out, you open out in terms of scale of largeness, then you have, okay, well, then the whole universe is my body, you know?
Right. And I think there's something though too, this like the spherical, right? It's like spheres within spheres.
Mm-hmm. And then the other part of it is then, okay, from density, like I know my body is a dense thing, but that density is an expression of greater and greater degrees of subtlety. And that's kind of what this is getting at. Like the most subtle expression of even this very body is the causal level of being, which I think in a scientific sense would be like just those very subtle vibrations that come out of like the backdrop quantum sort of field of void material, you know?
Yeah, because the TM organization has a very similar chart and they'll have I think that bottom line is essentially like it's manifest and unmanifest,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? Or it'd be like quantum. It's like quantum physics shifting over to classical physics.
Hmm. The ocean of being, as it's called on here, is a
Mm.
completely essential part of our experience, moment by moment. It is the awareness, the light by which we experience ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's nice to be able to tap into it, you know what I mean? To tap into the like ocean of being.
Yeah.
Um, Not everybody experiences that, right? In their like human lifetime. It's
Hmm.
there, it's always happening, it's always available.
Yeah, maybe not consciously, but it still is the awareness that allows them to have an experience of themselves.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can't find the poem, but I'll
Can't
say,
find it.
yeah, there was a time where I did intentionally. I can't remember what brought it about.
Hmm.
I was just really like, what? There must be a purpose for this. And I sat with it and it was like,
Hmm.
mm, so much energy came up. And it was like, at the time I was reading some of the like internal family systems stuff. So
Yeah.
it was like, I was imagining almost like these protectors of my own, right?
Mm.
um my own internal system like coming up like no 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 we're not going there, you know what I mean? And I was like it's okay, like I really had to be like we can do this, like and really like calm down the protection and
Yeah.
allow this energy of madness to just fully come up. And it was intense actually. There was, this was just in a like meditation. Maybe I smoke weed pretty often, so maybe there was some weed involved, but that's like
Mm.
it. And I was getting like full blown visuals. Um, but at first it was really scary. So it was very much reminiscent of like Hellraiser, like Clive Barker-esque torture,
Mm.
scary things like coming up. And it was almost like anything else with like a fear barrier, It was like all that scary stuff, but just like sitting with it and allowing it, then like morphed into these like abstract shapes that were showing like sort of the flow and function of like energy and the universe.
Mm.
And there's these little like mechanisms of chaos essentially that like allow for randomness and allow for change and allow for creativity. So it's just like really much a part of the creative force in the world.
Yeah.
And it
Mm.
like and not only that, then it like came into this presence, like this being, this character that's like always been just right there, like every time that, I really felt like, I'm gonna lose it, right? This time I'm gonna lose my mind. Hanging around these certain, um, pivotal moments in your life. And when you allow that, right, process, that transformative process to take place, on the other side of it is something really beautiful. So it's like always this like scary thing, this change, this energy of like
Hmm.
radical change. And something like um that's breaking old patterns and things. Um, but it's beautiful. It's another beautiful part of the whole. Yeah.
Hmm. Very cool. Yeah, it sounds like the first step was that you had a true and genuine curiosity to actually see what was truly going on, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's cool how you spoke about kind of stepping through the subtle fear barriers and having to kind of comfort the protectors. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've met some of those before, kind of like security guards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's like, I thank you so much for doing your job. You're doing a great job, and I'm grateful for you. We're just gonna step through here. We have the all access pass.
Exactly that though. It's very much like I appreciate you, but we can do this. We got this. We're
Hmm.
moving ahead.
Very cool. So then from the emotional body, we flow on into the mental body, which is the realm of thoughts and ideas. And on the more subtle end is almost like archetypal forms, I think, like belief systems, these more systems based kind of thought systems. Like you might enter into Buddhism here. I mean, Buddhism goes further, like, but it has a layer in the mental body. I'm sure it opens up all the way through the astral and causal, you know, and similarly with Christianity, and it has a mental construct part of it, but also has an opening up and through into the astral and causal bodies. Um, and then we just have our just our daily thinking on the lower end of it, which is like how we characterize ourselves in relation to other characters, and the sort of push and pull of reason and strategy and judgment. And uh yeah, I mean, in a way, I feel like I could get a lot more clarity about this layer, but at a sense we know it really well because it's where we've almost taken ourselves to be for the most part,
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. Hmm. Yeah, I'm almost surprised to see mental body and then etheric body. Because,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? We're so
Yeah,
in
I
that.
was surprised by that as well. And I think there's some kind of mystery there, but something to unpack almost. And
Mhm.
probably different systems actually do put it differently, like put the etheric more down towards the aura. But I think part of it is like she describes the etheric body as like the body. It's a body that's basically just like the physical body. Like it has the same shape, it has the same characteristics, it has the same look to it, but it's not physical. It's just like a subtle version of the physical body. And so like in dream states, you think you're still thinking just like Peter, you're still having the same emotional responses as Peter, but you're not in a physical body in that state. You're in the etheric body. um,
Got you. Well, and that would make sense too, even just like thinking about it, I guess the body, um, there's like this sort of representations we see of objects like a human being, like certain, light waves reach our retina and our brain like it makes sense of it in a certain way and creates the image of a human being.
Hmm.
But like what's actually there, you know,
Yeah.
um, I'm guessing, right? Like the etheric body is what's really there. Your mind's
Yeah.
interpreting that as a little human being.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and she says that this is actually what the layer where a lot of the physical sensations are actually experienced because it's just like subtle energy. So a lot of the communication of information that we call physical is actually more etheric in a sense. Um, but then saying that, it's like, what is the physical body then? And it's like, it's also mysterious because, but it's anyway, it's the densest level, and it's what we generally take ourselves to be, is this solid entity that has a continuation through time, is born, dies, and and yeah, has a certain life cycle and relies on food and has to breathe in order to continue and all those things.
Yeah, beautiful. Actually, with that description, like it totally does make sense. I do like the little
Hmm.
etheric body right there.
Yeah, because it's interesting in dream states, like light dream states where you're just between waking and sleeping. You have a lot of dreams and you're in a body. Oftentimes, this is how I'll realize I'm dreaming, is I'm in a body, but I'll be like swimming or something, and then realize I'm breathing, or I don't need to breathe, or something like I'm underwater and it's fine. And it's like, oh, this is my etheric body. This is my dream body.
Yeah, right. That actually happened to me when when I did the BUFO, the 5-MeO DMT. There was like
Mm,
one point where it was just like, I don't need to breathe, you know?
mm,
And but my body was not breathing and the my friend that was running ceremony was like sending like mental, she was telling me later, like she was just like mentally project, like breathe, breathe. And she was
yeah,
like get concerned, but I remember actually that part. I remember just being there and like just exactly like a dream when you realize that you don't
yeah.
have
Yeah, you can feel the subtlety of that, and it's like a decoupling of some part of consciousness, getting like a refinement of differentiation. Yeah, and it's
yeah.
interesting within the TM movement. They often talk about when you go deep into meditation that the breath can just kind of hover into stillness, and maybe there's really subtle breathing that's almost just like cellular, like it's just like but there's no like in breath, out breath happening.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I have that experience a lot, but I do remember when I was first starting to practice and during that like teaching process and like noticing the body just kind of settle in to a very like gentle and right, almost infrequent breathing pattern.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a way, this is the outward journey from the ocean of being to the physical body. And um, yeah, in the wholeness of it, that's just half the journey, really, because then we have the inward stroke of consciousness, which is from the physical back through the layers of being all the way back to the ocean. And the two go hand in hand and are symbolized by many archetypal uh, figures. In the Vedas. It'd be like Shiva or Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Brahma being the outward stroke, Vishnu being the maintenance of all of the structures of expression, and Shiva being the inward stroke, the destroying stroke of consciousness.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. And then the other way that it can be broken down or understood is basically the hero's journey. We have the call to adventure, and we venture out from home further and further afield, meeting deeper and more complex problems until we reach a point of, it's almost like the physical body is like the most advanced expression of consciousness. It's like the current cutting edge. Like consciousness hasn't gone further than that, you know, in terms of like further afield, further abroad, further into adventure. And it hits a certain point where it's almost like the differentiation becomes almost like overwhelming, or it can't go any further. It's become too separate from its source in a way. Like it's lost, it's gone so far that it's lost its sense of connection. And at that point is where the inward journey truly starts again. Like, oh, I need to rediscover myself. I need to re-find my way home, my source, what I am.
Yes. Beautiful. And it, it can play out. It's like there's a sort of over the lifetime hero's journey, and then there's like little cycles of the hero's journey that play out within that. And
Yeah,
then the humanities, right? Like hero's journey, the
yeah,
earth, it's yeah, really just
exactly.
mhm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What else is there to say? Hmm. Oh, well, the main thing that Dorothy focuses on in the healing work is that no matter where the issue is, I mean, physical body will be kind of like where the symptoms show up often. Quite often, the seed of the issue is going to be at a deeper layer. The seed, say, maybe the seeds between the mental and emotional or something like that. And then the solution, you have to go deeper than the seed, really. You have to transcend the seed in order to find the solution, because the expression causation starts at the ocean of being and ripples outward from there. Causation is not from the physical. The physical is the furthest out expression. So that's kind of a flipping around of how we've conventionally thought of reality. It's kind of flipping it upside down. Um, yeah.
Yeah, so like how do you because for me it's like, you know, very falls in line with like my practice of TM. And I don't like kind of after having that like initial big like awakening shift, and what that organization would call like cosmic consciousness, it,
Mm-hmm.
the actual practice of TM, like it's just it loses the same like value and purpose because you're kind of stuck then in that like meditative state, that transcendental state that you've been
Mm.
tapping into during your daily meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty soon after like my shift, it just didn't make sense. Didn't feel I could not make myself like meditate twice a day
Mm.
for 20. It's more just like when it comes about naturally, like I allow it. And it will
Yeah.
just come about like a sleepiness. I mean, it tells me when it's time. And I just have to put my little head down
Mm.
and go on a little journey. And of course, I can do it intentionally as well. And I don't really use a mantra anymore. The mantra disappeared over time in the
Mm.
organization. We talk about that. It's really just like a feeling
Yeah.
kind of morphing into that space.
Yeah.
And yeah, if there is, that is a great space to kind of sit with and, do some inquiry about something that's troubling you, let's say.
Yeah.
Wow, the answers to come.
Yeah. So it becomes that kind of integration process of that cosmic consciousness vibration with all the subsequent layers of expression.
Mhm.
Uh, and the way that Dorothy talks about it is settling down into this place, which she calls the gap, which is where the ocean of being just starts to express, but there's almost like an empty gap space right there, like a skin, like a membrane of the ocean of being before it comes out into expression. This is like a gap. And she always talks about settling into the gap. And as you settle into the gap, then you're all the way back at the cause, at the source, and from there a new impulse of intelligence can burst forth. It's very subtle, but then it comes all the way out to wherever the seed is and sort of meets it, and then gives it a new little bit of information, like just a subtly new spin. And then that seed with its subtly new spin can then again settle back into the gap. And with gratitude, there's like gratitude that keeps flowing with this relationship. That's kind of what like bridges the layers, is like the gratitude for what comes before and for the source. And then that just keeps like refining the expression through that. So she calls that the divine dialogue, how divinity meets its expression and how expression meets divinity. And you can break it into a linear process like that, like first this, then this, then this. But in truth, it becomes kind of timeless. And there's a benefit to breaking it down into its constituent steps because you become more clarified about it. But in truth, it can happen infinitely
Mhm.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I was just recently meeting with um, a group that I studied with for the Consciousness Advisors program through the TM org, and we've been meeting for a Bhagavad Gita study.
Mm,
It's just, I think, just an excuse to like, right, gather.
yeah.
But for, somebody was, going over like the actual process, like describing, the meditation process. And it's such a beautiful analogy and really like knowledge that you can apply everywhere to everything,
Yeah.
because the actual like meditation process is, you are when you sign up for TM and you get a TM teacher, you meet with them in person. They give you your mantra. It's something that you're never supposed to speak aloud. And over the course of a few days, they work with you to hone in the skill of using this mantra as, a meditation. Um,
Mhm.
but what you're doing is you're using a meditation or a mantra, sorry, to um, almost like grab your attention. And I do think there's like spiritual properties to these mantras that are like assisting in that process. But you could do this with anything, it applies anywhere, right? So to put that attention honed in on the mantra and being very gentle with yourself and allowing what wants to take place, gently putting your attention on the mantra. It's not forced because your mind will start to wander. And you want to allow, that's part of the process, allow your mind to wander. And once you realize, you become conscious and aware that your mind is doing the wandering, gently bring it back to center,
Mm,
to the mantra. Allow. And what eventually happens is a gap between those where there is no mantra and no thoughts, no mind wandering. That gap space in between. And you can become aware of that and you can settle into it more and more and more. But it's a natural process that takes place. You can't force it. You don't want to. It's all
mhm.
about this gentle allowing the flow to happen. And this whole process can be applied to life because you take the time to mm, be with yourself, right? To practice that meditation. And then you go back out into the world, right? So it's like getting clear on yourself and who you are, clearing some of the conditioning, then back into action. Rest, action.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, and it's such a, it actually becomes kind of like a superpower because it allows you to actually kind of like harvest your experience, you could say, or sort of like mine your experience for the gold it contains, kind of like sifting it down, like all the aggregate, and you sift like the precious metals out of it. And I
Yeah.
found this even with things like climbing. I used to climb a lot, and you'll do like, okay, you'll do a moment of action where I'm climbing a route and it's strenuous and full focus and it's very physical. And then you fall off the wall, and then allowing yourself to have that in between point where you go into zero effort. You're not even thinking, you're not analyzing, you're just receiving. And that downloads all the information into the nervous system about that experience you just had. And then from there, there's again like this impulse of intelligence, like a natural pull to try again, to go again. And that flow is there in everything like that. And yeah, that's how we learn, really, in the deepest sense.
Beautiful. That's the cycle. And it's everywhere, it really is everywhere in everything. And you can have a gentle awareness of it and acceptance and allowing, because it's not, again, like we talked about before, it's not about just being up here all the time. It is natural to have these cycles. So
Yeah.
even in nature and in the seasons is represented for us. That's why, um, pagans we're so in tune with the seasons and the cycles of life. Mhm.
Mm. Yeah, because yeah, like through this process of this is how consciousness learns about itself, actually, and then learns how to express itself even more beautifully and express the ocean of being all the way out to the physical level. Eventually, it's like splashing its way, so that because it wants to express through every single part of itself, and it is, but it becomes more and more obvious, more and more apparent, more and more consciously aware of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Because you're right, that like that's what it wants. It wants to express through you, through your like beautiful, complex, unique nature. And that's why when people say like you're the one just getting in the way of everything that, you're attracting, because I mean that's part of it's like also part of your expression, right? Like you're getting in the way of just allowing yourself to express the way that you do.
Yeah.
And often it's because, fear of judgment or rejection or
Hmm.
things like that. But it's not it's not about that the outward response from the world. It's finding that true expression in yourself, and the right people will find you.
Yeah, that true resource.
Mhm.
And it's interesting too that the fear definitely has played a crucial role in this process of expression. And because I think it is the fear like allows for that continuing complexification and that outward movement, you could say, into more and more differentiation and separation on some hand. So the fear almost breaks new boundaries, or like breaks new ground, like heading outward from consciousness, but then needs to be resolved in order to allow, you know, love to actually inhabit that new expression. So they're both like crucially, they're both necessary in the formation of consciousness's expression.
Yeah, I mean beautiful without fear, without fear barriers, and without separation. Well, I mean, we would not be having this experience, right? We would be in the astral realm.
Mhm.
So, it's a beautiful little cycle that there's so much lightness on the other side, to go through that, that polar change from fear to love is a beautiful experience and process. And exactly the more that you um face your fear, walk up to it and be gentle with yourself, of course, but the more that you're willing to face it and explore it with some curiosity, the more opportunity you have to walk through that transformation.
Yeah, and like a greater richness of experience, perhaps for consciousness in a way, because that's another way that Dorothy sometimes breaks it down is like consciousness has already experienced itself as an astral expression and knows itself as that, and it knows both the outward and the inward journey of that, but it's still discovering itself at the physical level, you know? And so then when it does discover itself all the way out here, there's a greater richness of, it's like there's a greater, yeah, it's all love, but there's like love in a myriads of forms and expressions. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because, like, to me, like, darkness is depth to me,
Mm,
and richness, and I love the complexities of life. And I was actually just saying this to Randy, like, when I was talking about Los Angeles, and there's, some people have so many opinions about Los Angeles, often without ever having set foot there. But it's very difficult to like get a feel for Los Angeles unless you like really have lived in it and like in the heart of it, and even like know people that have shown you things, because it's just like its own country. It's massive, massive,
yeah.
compact, dense with people, and it's a melting pot. Every every culture, everything can be found there. To me, that's actually like what is so exciting, what I love about it. But I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and it's holds like sort of a special place to me in my heart. But it's more um like I loved I only had a motorcycle when I was living in LA. So it was like really being like in the city on a
Mm,
motorcycle or riding the subway. And like I love people watching on the subway. My only complaint really is the smell. Like I don't have a sensitive nose, but like
mm,
being in that environment like isn't I just don't see it the same way as other people. To me, I'm like, oh, this is like peak
mm,
people watching.
mhm.
Volunteering at the midnight mission on Skid Row, like, this is terrifying for most people. I'm like, there's so much life here, you
Mm,
know? And yeah, like doing clinical hours at an outpatient clinic in South Central, like running group therapy with gangbangers and prostitutes, like that's,
mm,
oh, yes, I love that. So like,
mm,
there really truly is so much love and life to be found in these spaces that people tend to reject. And these things can look so scary from the outside, but when you're in it and you're dancing with it and you do tap into that highest perspective of it,
mm.
there's so much beauty to be experienced there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that I've found almost like the more challenging thing of late is actually almost like the what Andrew called the high ego, but it might be, you know, parts of the mental body, but it's like the part of the ego that's in separation, but has still like quite an open perspective on life and experience and stuff like that. but still has this sort of holding on of like, I'm in control of it, and I'm the one who's responsible for healing myself, and I have to be a good person. And there's a lot of actually really harsh programs there that kind of hide under the guise of virtuous behavior and stuff like that. And I've been noticing that coming up in my experience lately, where it's almost like I long for someone who's just like drug addicted and like in the deepest expression of egoic separation, because that upper ego stuff is just like, well, it's just the attempt to again, just the attempt to manage it or control it. So it's just reflecting something in me, the part of me that wants to control its experience through that, lofty understanding or something like that.
Yeah, well, and part of it is, I think, though, some of the conditioning around those like topics. And
Mm,
mm, because I noticed like I feel like I have a slightly unique perspective on these things because I just didn't experience in this lifetime all the conditioning around
mm,
that stuff because it was such an unusual like upbringing,
mm,
I was surrounded by, listen, sex, drugs, rock and roll, what I mean? All that. It's like it was not foreign to me at a young
mm,
age. Um, the religious conditioning was not there.
mm,
And having left home as a teenager, being so young and just like, I don't no, nobody tells me what to do. And just being like out in the world.
mm,
So like being able to experience that stuff without judgment, but also seeing how much pain these things can cause for people. So it's really, it's like anything else. Everything is this sort of beautiful dance,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's perfectly expressed, because the way that I was also noticing this was, yeah, it's basically the belief that there's some sort of conflict between functional expressions of the ego and unfunctional expressions of the ego, and the belief that there's a true difference there, and that there's somehow that the functional is somehow staying clear of the unfunctional in some sort of separation game through its own virtue. It's staying separate from the dysfunctional. And yeah, maybe that's something that we could almost just like open into, we could say like a healing around, or just like looking at.
Yeah, no, I think that's a beautiful intention. And I think relevant, like kind of a theme that we've been touching on, right, is that like acceptance of the full, higher and lower nature of the self. It isn't about trying to get away from that. It's actually just about like learning to be in balance and in harmony with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess again, what comes to mind here is that there's been like a deep learning that, um, in a way, that should be hidden because it will be rejected by others. So that aspect of myself should remain hidden, because there's a belief that others will reject it like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and here's the thing, yeah, like so I've noticed myself this, right? Like you were saying, wanting to be around someone that's like just full-blown drug addiction or something. Well, I've noticed in a lot of spaces that, maybe are like the underbelly you would consider of society, but where people are raw, they are in touch with, and they show their deep selves to each other.
Mm,
So, and that was the world kind of where I came from. And then to go into like normal functioning society where everybody's, keeping it tight and
zipped up.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so unnatural. And it's like, what are we doing? Come on, like just,
Mm,
say the thing or, meet me here.
mm,
Uh, it's okay. But I think we have to create these spaces
mm,
and be the embodiment and example for that so that eventually it bleeds over into normal society functioning. I think that's where that's the transformation we're headed towards. But
Yeah.
people, it's like you go out in public and you're like, well, I don't want to, everybody else is acting this way. I don't know, I want to be the one person that's what gonna say what's on my mind. Well, yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Somebody
Yeah.
has to.
Hmm.
Might as well be me. you know?
Yeah. Yeah, well, because if we want to feel good and feel free, I mean that's it's almost like yeah. Luckily life is always moving us in that direction and opening us up to what we've been rejecting, and there's a gentleness to it and a intelligence.
That's so perfect because there really is. Like it's naturally happening. So you actually don't have to like fight or force yourself. It's just getting out of the way, like
Hmm.
allowing, and it's okay. Like have grace for others and for yourself, if it's right, if there's difficulty, if there's misunderstandings, if there's, you know, it's
Yeah.
not supposed to go perfectly. That's not the idea, but that
Yeah.
we're learning to express ourselves authentically, which, all I really mean by that is that we're tapping more into how we're actually feeling and expressing that.
Yeah, like a naturalness in a way. Still, so many of our functional roles require an unnaturalness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, well, I feel like shit, but I have 2 more hours of work and I have to see, 16 more people. So just shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like all day, every day. That's like the adult life is to just like, hold everything tight, compose yourself to go and be this like fake representation of a human.
Mm.
Fucking what?
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like a disservice to ourselves and everyone around us.
Totally.
Yet, it's almost like we kind of find ourselves already embedded in that, so we're not going to reach perfection just like that. It's kind of like we dance with it until we slowly become more and more authentic within it, and perhaps we're removed from these environments, or these environments transform around us one way or the other.
That was really nice.
Yeah, it seems like we find our way to the same general topic. I think it's just because it's what's relevant.
Yeah. To me, that is the new earth.
Mm,
And so it's like all the little things ultimately kind of tie into this one big shift of changing how we're all relating to each other. To me, that's the new earth.
mm,
And from that will come the changes that heal the planet naturally. And a lot of that will probably, breaking down, for example, a lot of the conditioning around, this idea that like marriage and kids is the pinnacle experience. That's what everybody's working towards this, right?
mm,
Um, well, we've overpopulated the planet and are destroying it. So, and then there's like, these experts that come out and say, well, capitalism would be destroyed if we don't make more babies. Go out there and make those babies. It's like,
mm,
well, this is like a natural, the world is taking care of itself, it's healing itself by naturally, right? You just see it everywhere. So many more people are waking up and realizing, actually, I know a bunch of people that are married with kids and they're not happy.
mm.
well, that's not the answer. Um, and there are other options. There you now see examples of people like being single and traveling the world and like focusing on their careers and being happy, like finding value in that life. Now, you can still, there's some people are very much called to parenting and that lifestyle, but
Hmm.
allow for that. Like, let's allow society and people in society to figure out what they actually want. There's so many, it can look like literally anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we start freeing people up to like make those choices on their own and actually just gravitate towards what they love,
Hmm.
then it frees up, right? Like it'll free up the economy, it'll free up the pollution and the overpopulation. And, I
Yeah.
think a lot of it is solved through this issue.
Yeah. In a way, again, that parallels the process of settling down into the neutrality of source awareness and then letting expression again arise from there, but noticing where the really strict programming of judgments, like if I don't do this, then I'm a failure. It's like, well, that doesn't allow for much leeway for consciousness to explore and create new options. And
Exactly. And like that's the call, right? Is to get out of these normal path. This is like the that meditation I was having with madness, right? It's like, madness is here right now on the planet to
hmm,
make way for something new.
true. Yeah, chaos.
Mm.
It's one of the shadows that the Gene Keys is inviting me to embrace in my experience.
Ah, yes, the gene keys. Yes, I was really enjoying that.
Mm,
So much there. Such
hmm.
a system.
Seeing that there is an underlying harmony
Yeah.
that expresses even in those pockets of chaos, like you were seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, it all works, all these processes and like elements, you know, are working together just fine and their own cycles and dance and patterns.
Mm,
The human mind cannot fully grasp all of it. It can't. It's not meant to.
yeah. Hmm. So yeah, maybe we can just settle down into the ocean of being together and allow these layers of expression to sort of, what we say, call into alignment, or really just be as they are, is maybe more accurate. And for me, the interesting places are sort of these areas where the layers meet one another. And really, this diagram could be subdivided infinitely, or just be seen as one giant continuum that it is. As we settle into consciousness, we just allow the light to meet every layer and nuance of our experience and receive the grace of being present with ourself and allowing the impulses of light intelligence to interpenetrate and communicate with all the layers of our experience as a blessing, a field of blessing, multidimensional. field of blessing. In a sense, this is where we settle into the awareness that we're all working together and we're all working on the same purpose, and the joy of, being on this sort of team of light which has no opposite, is all inclusive.